help Telefonica disrupt the telecom industry and bring it to become the telecom company of the future. So we are super lucky to have John Butt here. He's the founder of Conduit Ventures, and he's especially relevant for some of us for the scale up program because he is very active in the energy space and has. First of all, I would like you to give a brief introduction of your background
Yes.
and what you're doing right now.
Bought domain in terms of investments. Have been in the early to mid stage. We see things through until a different type of financing is required, or we reach a liquidity exit type event. And our domain is sustainability, but with often energy platform. And why energy? A variety of reasons. We need it. We use it. It also happens to be my background as well. So it's what I knew. But I have to say, coming from a traditional energy background and seeing the way, let's say, that there's an energy transition pace movement going in. And so this is why Conduit was established, to be part and shape that transition by investing in innovation. And soon after that, we saw where some of the key drivers were in terms of geographic markets, which was, I mean, everybody hears about China, so I'm not going to talk about China. So we set up in a partnership with the government, actually, in China, for a variety of reasons, to have eyes and ears on the ground, because we saw that that's where there was going to be big, strong demand, and there was a very strong pace and aptitude towards adopting new solutions. Okay, and it didn't suffer as much, let's say, from legacy. They were willing and wanting to leapfrog. And so this is why around 10 years ago we made a partnership there. And so it's gone beyond being just eyes and ears. It's laid the foundation for us to actually make some investments on the ground as well. But that link with China is more a collaborative one because you can take solutions from here and then deploy them there and to the extent that they're relevant and there's and that's kind of initially we started out the business model and new innovation um, is derived from that first phase and we just put mon- money underground. So what you have now is a collaboration between the UK, Asia, and also Europe wide as well, despite all the politics, okay, which we're hearing. So that's a snapshot.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I was thinking that energy has always been a very strategic industry for countries, and they've
Yes.
been sometimes very protective, and they.
Yes.
We've seen many countries block some operations between countries just to
Yes.
avoid giving control of their energy to people they don't trust,
Yes.
or so. How do you see this evolving with the new era of energy? Like, how do the trends that you are seeing play with
Yes.
the control that the countries want to have?
Yes. I think the driver. Yes, you're correct in terms of control. Okay, but it's very interesting. The drivers are multiple. It's demand. As countries' economies grow, they simply just need energy. Now, you can get that energy from traditional sources, but for a variety of reasons, which you're all aware, the traditional sources are winding, they're no longer seen as the sole means to meet the demand for energy. Okay, and so the biggest driver is actually demand, and there's a societal driver as well, because everybody recognizes that there's a future cost down the line if you don't comply with, let's say, let's use the generic phrase, sustainability standards. There's a societal cost, there's a real cost. So if one thinks that compliance is expensive, think of non-compliance, even more expensive. But the real driver is demand for energy. So I don't, from my personal standpoint, I don't think we will see. let's say, one silver bullet which will replace all. No, it's a mix, and that depends on the type of application, the market, and the geography. So we need all forms of energy, but the common theme is you must comply with certain sustainability standards. The days when you had freedom to do whatever you want, not anymore. People are seeing the costs. The other we have seen, and I think it's relevant for a lot of you, if somebody mentions energy a few years ago, it was the unsexiest thing. Okay, you just think, oh my God, that's like yesterday's economy, which is actually, there's a certain amount of truth there. But I have to say, the impact of ICT, the impact of digitization has had the biggest, impact on the energy landscape. It's just changing it, and that is making a lot of the incumbents, the traditional incumbents, a little bit nervous. And in the last few years, that's been the biggest driver for change to meet the demand. So we are very focused on the intersection of digitization and, let's say, the energy production or storage or the value chain.
Great. Let's dig a bit more into that, because this idea of the energy industry focusing towards connectivity and data, that's something that as Telefonica sounds interesting. So I think that that's part of the pillars of the agreement between Energy and Telefonica to
Yes.
make this program. So what do you see are the trends, and how will these trends have transform the energy industry as we know it now?
I think the first thing is first, you guys have a big role to play. Okay, and you will have a big role to play because you have a network and you have the ecosystem of technologies. But I think the biggest impact of digitization, and I can see just convergence, different players who are in digitization, you're just seeing that evolution. You're dealing with data, you're managing data, okay, and but that creates new business models. And I'm a big supporter of decentralization, of energy delivery to the consumer, whether that consumer is an individual or a business. Okay. Today we have, from the generation standpoint, the traditional standpoint, we have a high degree of centralization. Okay, and today people want their energy on demand. They want to have the right to manage it. They are even in certain countries. They're even creating. There's even the demand for as to what type of energy they want and when. Okay, you're seeing it in certain countries, but I would say the fact that groups like yourselves, okay, with a strong footprint in the ICT, what you enable is different business models. And what do I mean by that? You can be, it's called off the grid. You're not centralized. You can do it as an individual basis, or you can do it as a community basis. Okay, where you have your own mini grid and the control system, if you like, the central nervous system is typically ICT, digitization.
Cool, great.
Yes.
Something you mentioned that for us it's very important is the idea of partnering. So that's also the core of what we do. The whole idea of Wires, that Telefonica doesn't have to do all the innovation, doesn't have to do everything. It's very important for Telefonica to partner with startups. How do you see this works, and what's the best way in which the startups can approach this situation to partner better with startups?
I think, as you all know, this is gone. I think I've lost this.
Okay. Right. Okay. Yes. The biggest issue for any startup is route to market, route and timing to market. And whether we agree or like it or not, there's always a tendency for any innovator to say, I'm the best. That's a good trait, and I'm going to control as much of the value chain and what I do as possible. Okay, control as much. You know, that's very healthy to have, but partnership is very important because every startup, regardless of which domain you know, they are operating in, being relevant to a user, and that user could be a channel partner, that user could be an end user, is highly important because what does that do? It gets you out there, but generically it de-risks from an adoption, commercial adoption standpoint, and increases your relevance in the marketplace. At the end of the day, there are certain industries which are hugely traditional. And yes, even I would like to say that we're playing a role in disrupting the energy industry. But I would be naive to believe that overnight where some of the companies we are engaged with are going to change the incumbent and so forth. No. I think the end users, the businesses are inherently traditional. But increasingly, we're seeing a receptive, you know, the more receptive to change. Now, if you want to make yourself relevant, you need to have an impact, okay, to that end user. Now, sometimes that impact doesn't need to be immediately or in the medium term a financial impact, but I would say strategic impact. So you're relevant because these partners are large companies. If you where those few 100,000 or few millions turn into tens and hundreds of millions, yes, then you're relevant. Okay, so this is where the importance of having strategic partnerships. I'm a big one for saying as early as possible because you de-risk, you ruggedize. By ruggedize, I mean you make it commercially acceptable. You get out there, it's visible. People see the impact of what you are doing. It doesn't really matter if it's on a small scale, but it's visible. So you go beyond the hope and pray into the relevance. Yeah.
Great. Okay. Okay. I'm happy to continue, but let's see if anyone has a question from. Okay, Petra.
Hello there, very nice to listen to you. I'm Petra from Shine, and we are an energy startup now.
Right. Okay. Yes.
I'd be interested in your. I relate with everything that you say, and I think certainly sort of shift in consumer behavior.
Right.
Of energy users.
Yes.
We're living and breathing this.
Correct.
So why is the energy sector so far behind? You mentioned China. It doesn't have to be China.
Yes.
Where do you see the biggest openness of consumers, like if not demand, for new ways of maybe generating, maybe consuming, maybe sharing energy? What's the North Star for you this year?
Okay, let's leave Asia aside, okay, because that's a different term, and let's look at Europe. I would say Scandinavia, Germany. Okay, you have the framework. There's a receptive, you know, the willingness to change and to make that transitioning has trickled down from it's at all levels. I mean, Germany in particular, I spend a lot of time there, and we've done some stuff there. I have to say, I'm impressed. You know, they've embraced that concept, and you have a you know, when I was, just to digress slightly, when I was saying that the consumer is playing a big role in driving that change, I was actually thinking of Germany, where you have a concept of, let's take the house, okay. I think the expression, the German expression is passive housing. That's the, you know, the sustainable house, okay, the sustainable dwelling. There's legislation for that. The individual who lives in that home is driving the change, where you are seeing some of the large, let's say the traditional players, actually having, I've heard numbers ranging, they have capacity up to in double digits, which are not being utilized. Why? Because new forms of energy are being, providing power directly to consumers. That change is actually driven by the user. And when the government has followed that, both federal and regional, and so you're seeing that trickle down effect, and a lot of it has passed into legislation. Yes, I hope that answers. The UK actually not far behind, and I think that a lot. Unfortunately, our experience has been stop-start. Okay, but the north, particularly in Scotland, there is, I think, thanks to the growth of the the renewables, particularly the offshore wind, you're seeing it's driving a change because they want to be a center of excellence, whether it's on offshore or storage and so forth. So again, you're seeing change, but it's a confluence of private sector, public, consumers. So you need people to come together. You can't leave it to one sector alone. Yes, I hope that addresses. Yeah.
I often very like the fact that the stuff program up the raw power of the that's my background.
Yes.
And when you see what has been happening to the incumbent players
Yes.
by sheer brute force of
Yes.
actually just demanding something different.
Yes.
Can be done.
Yes. Yes.
Before you know you've got a massive tidal wave of actually
Correct. And the large utilities on the power side, the major incumbents, which are part of the energy value chain, are now paying very close attention because they're under threat. Yes.
Any other questions from here? So, have you identified any gaps, any areas in which you think that not enough is being done, or that there's an opportunity to dig into some areas?
Yes, we speak about energy in isolation, but what we're seeing is a convergence of different industries. I had the pleasure of having just a brief chat with on automotive, okay, and that the automotive, you're seeing closer conversion between, let's call it, mobility industry and the energy industry, driven by electrification. You see, power electrification is, because the costs are coming down and you're getting greater supply, is actually driving. It's because it's becoming cheaper. It's replacing other traditional forms of generating energy, whether it's gas or something else. But again, to what brings everything together, say for instance with mobility and the traditional forms of energy, well, I call it stationary power. Again, it's the digital. We're seeing digital playing a big role in the car. Okay. And at the same time, too, the powertrain of a car is changing. There are movements to link that powertrain with the individual home, you see, and then that feds into the form of energy. So you're just seeing a greater level of convergence. The Japanese are coming out with different things about I call it home power. Is it home power or is it mobility power? Where, on the one hand, you have the power for the vehicle. On the other hand, that power could also be used in the home. So you're seeing a great deal of convergence, and I'd say the ICT has a big role to play. I just think the change is disruptive. So straight answer to to your question is that there's still different points. Yeah, one can play, but the rate of convergence between different industries is rapid, and you cannot. I think it's a risk to look at things in isolation.
Yeah. Very interesting point. Okay. Continue. So yeah, I wanted to talk about how these changes in the industry will affect less developed countries and will will this? Do you think this will help reduce the gap, increase the gap? What do you think?
Um, I would say the biggest chance for change is the emerging economies, largely because I would like to say that in within Europe we'll see that transformational change, but I think that's going to be gradual. Why is that? Economics. There's legacy. Okay, you have entrenched investments. You can't ask somebody to write off that investment overnight and replace it. It's just not practical. So I think it's likely to be a gradual trade. But in a lot of the emerging economies, whether that's in Asia or other parts of the different parts of Asia or in Africa, going back to what I said, the driver is um, they just want energy. Okay. By the time you wait for your centralized form of energy to be built, we could be talking 10 years from now. So again, you have the chance to leapfrog. And that's what you are seeing. So actually, I mean, your question is the growth is going to be in the emerging, the rate of growth in the emerging nations because it's driven by economic growth and different energy is central to a sustainable economic growth. So you can't wait 10 years for a power plant to be planned, built. So you go with what you can deploy. I call it the IKEA business model, where you buy something and then you retrofit it at home. You see, yes, yeah.
Cool.
And you are seeing again in the a lot of the emerging economies all over the world, you're actually seeing it happen where people are actually reaching out to the consumer directly or communities and creating energy in spite of the centralized power. People, yes.
Um, okay, so yeah, maybe like last question. Anyone? If not, I go for it. No? Okay. Okay. So my last question would be as an investor
Yes.
and this question applies not only for energy but all like investors investing in sustainable
Yes.
companies or impact investment. Uh, how do you how do you fit the sustainability and the social impact involved in your investments within your re, uh, return KPIs
Sure.
and
Sure. Yes.
objectives and goals?
No, I mean, I wish I could give a straight answer to that, okay? But I think that, um, well, sustainability is here to stay. This is what I said. If people think that it's a headache to comply, it's a bigger headache not to comply. Okay, so that's the first thing. So now, sustainability is not just an environmental or societal, it's also in a commercial standpoint. And if you're going to get those significant, from an entrepreneur standpoint, significant and sustainable commercial returns, which would enable you to get to achieve your exit and make you all, wealthy, rich, pe- people, you need to satisfy those. You need to, I call it strategic returns, which first you have to be relevant to the person who's going to use you, relevant for the long term, which means you make an impact. Whether it's a channel partner or the end user, such as the consumer, you must be relevant to that person. So that partner wakes up in the morning, the first thing they think is what you're developing. That's what I call by strategic returns. And that's tied in with, let's say, the societal returns. I think we're all seeing whatever generation you want to call it, that society is having a major change. So I actually think the financial returns, the sustainable commercial returns, are a function of all of the other forms of returns. Otherwise, it's up and down. You're great one day and you're dead the next. So it's about commercial sustainability, and that's a function of all the let's say the societal, the strategic, and the financial. Yes.
Great, great.
So I hope
So
that.
yeah, that's super interesting, very good insights. So yeah, thank you very much for your time and for your amazing insights, and really happy to have you here.
No, thanks. It's a pleasure. I'm trying to make a boring industry exciting for entrepreneurs. Right. Yes.
Yeah, no, definitely.
Yeah.
Great.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you very much.
It's a pleasure.
And,
Right.
okay, and the rest of you, please don't move. Because we are a bit behind schedule. We'll go straight into the next one. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks. It's a pleasure.